Everyone is saying the new Aeroplan changes are terrible, but are they really as bad as people are making them out to be? While some redemptions might get worse, there's a couple of hidden benefits that a lot of people are really missing. Today, we'll first break down what's changing, why some of these changes might actually be good for travelers, before spending the bulk of this video ranking all the ways you can use your Aeroplan points from worst to best. If you're new here, my name is Alyan, and if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. We hope you're enjoying these slightly more consistent uploads. Before we dive into the latest updates, let's take a quick rewind. Back in 2020, Aeroplan had a complete overhaul. After years of clunky booking systems, massive surcharges, as well as limited flexibility, the program was overhauled completely from the ground up. Out went the strictly distance-based ban, replaced with a much more modern, flexible solution. We gained a ton more flexibility at the expense of dynamic pricing, meaning we had to pay a little bit more for our redemptions, but we could book any flight we wanted as long as Air Canada was operating it. We also gained family sharing, no carrier-imposed surcharges, which saves you quite a bit compared to a lot of other programs out there, as well as the ability to combine multiple airlines on the same booking when booking with Aeroplan points. At the time, it was a renaissance. Aeroplan wasn't just refreshed, it was completely overhauled, and it became one of the strongest points programs across the entire world. But as with any loyalty program, the golden days could only last so long. Aeroplan has slowly had more dynamic pricing elements, some of the partner availability we used to see so often has gone away, and the program has become a little bit worse over time. That brings us to the changes that came in earlier this year. Some really call this a nail in the coffin for Aeroplan, but honestly, I think our experience here is a little bit different. Before diving into the changes themselves, let's explain how Air Canada actually prices their bookings. They use something called an award chart. The award chart outlines how many points it takes to fly from one place to another, both with Air Canada and then with all their partners, mainly the Star Alliance bunch. Air Canada has now updated what this chart looks like, adding a median price for what the bookings might end up being. This is just an average price, a much more realistic estimate for each flight across each class in the different distance bands. It should show users how much it's going to actually end up costing if you want to fly some of these routes with Air Canada themselves. This is possibly not the best example, but flying from Montreal over to Frankfurt would cost you 35,000 points one way in economy class with Aeroplan, as well as with their partners. In this case, both the starting price and the median price is the exact same, but that might differ across different route combinations as well as different distance bands. Another change that people were pretty upset about was the introduction of more dynamic pricing for some of the partners. Earlier, only Emirates and FlyDubai had this, but now we've got the addition of Etihad as well as United. This also extends to some of the regional carriers Air Canada has a partnership with, like PAL, Canadian North, and Calm Air. Now, while I was initially very disappointed with this when it came out, there was a thought in my mind that it would lead to some better availability across the board. This is because it would extend past the Saver awards available before and allow you to book these flexible awards offered by the airlines themselves. Now for Etihad, this does actually seem to be the case. There seems to be many more seats available across a range of dates, no matter where you really want to fly. The issue is, the price I'm seeming to find for a lot of these routes are way above the minimum price and end up being some pretty ridiculous figures. Any Toronto Abu Dhabi space in business class now costs over 220,000 Aeroplan points one way, which is significantly above the 90,000 points it should be costing if you're just using the regular partner award chart. I was able to book a routing from Copenhagen to Singapore through Abu Dhabi, which cost me 80,000 points in business class just a couple of months ago, but now looking at the exact same thing, it costs over 192,000 points, which is an insane increase, and I don't really think it's worth flying. Etihad, they're great, but for a premium that large, I'm not really sure I'm willing to pay. United redemptions also used to be a really good way to get maximum value out of your Aeroplan points, especially within North America and over to Asia. They were a really solid sweet spot as they weren't really affected by the dynamic pricing gremlins that Air Canada redemptions were. Now, while the cost of some of these redemptions has increased from 20 to 40%, they sometimes still end up being pretty good value compared to the Air Canada redemptions across. They definitely took the largest hit in North America, but the options are still reasonably strong. While over to Asia, they're definitely still the best way to get over there with the most consistent availability on Aeroplan of any carrier right now. Last minute awards to Asia from San Francisco or from the West Coast used to be just 75,000 points, which was an absolute deal and a half. These now cost 100,000 points, but I still think this is stellar value because you're almost guaranteed to get some seats available, especially much closer to the departure day. United redemptions in Europe also haven't really increased much in the number of points it takes. I think we're seeing a shift from 60 to 65,000 on some routes, maybe from 60 to 70,000, but again, knowing that you'll be able to find that availability almost all the time as there's so many places United flies from and flies to in Europe, it's still a really good way to fly over on a very consistent product that Ion flew just a couple of weeks ago. The bottom line here for these changes is, yes, some of these redemptions do end up costing more. It's nice that Air Canada is giving us a bit more transparency with this award chart, but that being said, I think the Aeroplan program is still incredibly strong, and I don't really think that these changes are making as big of a difference as people are maybe considering. Now that we've talked about most of the changes, let's rank all the different ways you can use your Aeroplan points from worst to best. I'm just going to kick it off with the worsto, which is by far merchandise. Yes, there's going to be a bit of variance in value here, but I was looking at, for example, a PS4, which is 114,000 Aeroplan points. To buy this yourself, it's $580 of cash, which means you're getting only 0.5 cents per point on that value, which is absolutely comical and something I would definitely not recommend doing. Now let's talk gift cards. While they may seem like a very convenient way to use your Aeroplan points, they still don't end up offering you anything close to what you really should be getting with your points otherwise. For example, a $500 gift card costs you 66,500 points, which gets you about 0.75 cents per point. That's well below the benchmark of 1.5 to 2 cents per point we want to get for any of the travel we're really booking. So unless you're really strapped for cash and are sitting on a mountain of points with no way to use them, I would probably also stay away from redeeming for gift cards. Next up, vacation packages. This one again might seem like a pretty enticing thing to do if you're planning on booking a vacation with Air Canada anyways, and you get the option to redeem some of your points against the total cost of your vacation. There's a fixed value here of 1 cent per point, so to redeem $1,000 off your vacation package, you'd have to redeem 100,000 points. I don't think 1 cent per point is terrible value, but I definitely think there's better ways to redeem. The big plus here is really flexibility. There's no real blackout dates, and it's pretty simple to just redeem your points right across. So I don't think it's absolutely comical, as I probably mentioned, but again, maybe let's stay away from it. Now let's get into Hotel Savers, something that Aeroplan advertises quite a bit because they want you to use your points here. Hotel Savers allows you to book hotels, paying with your Aeroplan points, and if you book 3 nights with points, you get 1 for free, which is a pretty solid perk to advertise. The value here varies quite a lot. I would say if you're booking further out, you should expect about 1 cent per point, which is not terrible value. But as you get closer to the days, that's when the value here can actually really shine. Sometimes the cash price of a hotel is pretty ridiculous, but within this program, it's a little bit more fixed. So you'll be able to get pretty solid value. I've seen some people talk about getting 2 cents per point, which is definitely a way I would use Aeroplan points because it's really hard to get 2 cents per point consistently for economy class bookings for the average booking you're making. I would also have a look to see where your hotel is pricing during peak seasons, especially with that 4th night for free. You might be able to sneak in some solid value if you're redeeming for flights anyways. Okay, now onto the actual ways you should probably be using your points. The first of which is booking Air Canada flights. This is probably what you think about when you're booking with Aeroplan points, and I'd wager this is how the vast majority of Aeroplan points are actually used. As of 2020, Air Canada lets you redeem Aeroplan points for any flight across their entire network, provided there is a seat available on that flight. That being said, there's of course a huge range, as these flights are now priced dynamically. This means that as the cash price for the ticket changes, so does the cost with points, but sometimes these things might not change at the exact same rates. This is where you can get some pretty strong value. Economy class redemptions might actually be a solid way to get value out of your points, as there's always a lot of seats available and you can get some pretty decent value both within North America and then while flying over to Europe or Asia. You can sometimes get a flight for 6,000 or 7,000 points that might cost something like $200, which is a stellar 2 cent per point redemption. To get the cents per point, which is something we've been talking about quite a bit, you take the cash price of the flight you have or the thing you're redeeming for, subtract any taxes, fees, or surcharges, and then divide by the number of points you're redeeming for and multiply by 100. More often than not, you should be redeeming at 1.5 or 1.7 cents per point at least, just for flights, just because I think anything less than that, and you might be looking at some of the other options being better value. If cash rates are high and you're sitting on a bunch of points, it again might make sense to redeem for just 1.5 cents per point, redeeming 25,000 points instead of $400 of cold hard cash. For business class, things are more of the same. Signature class, which is Air Canada's business class, is certainly a solid product, but it's certainly also not groundbreaking. To give you guys a better understanding of value here though, we're not really going to talk about cents per point with some of these business class redemptions, because with business class flights, you're going to see a huge range of prices and values based on the fare code you're booking, the dynamic pricing. A lot of other factors might actually really mess up the number you would actually be paying for, so it makes a bit more sense to use a different metric. The metric we're going to use is points per flight hour, because I think that's a pretty solid way to really adjust for all the different fare codes and fare classes. We'd value Air Canada business class as something like 10,000 points per flight hour when flying internationally, and about 7,000 points when flying within North America. For example, this means if you can get a flight from Toronto to Barcelona for 80,000 points of signature class, As it's an 8-hour flight, you're getting pretty solid value here as you're paying just 10,000 points per flight hour. More likely than not, you're going to see a much higher price as again, these things are dynamically priced. But don't worry, if you still want to fly over to Europe in business class, you can do it for much less and potentially even lower than that 10,000 point per hour figure. Now let's dive into the best way to use your points, booking with the Air Canada partners. Now there's two different tiers of partner here. There's the select partners as well as the normal partners. The select partners also have that same dynamic pricing that Air Canada does. And it's going to be again a range of values, so it's hard to really break down what that might end up being. But sometimes that might end up being better value than Air Canada themselves. As for example, through United, you're still going to get better rates overall across their entire route network compared to using Air Canada and their full-on dynamic pricing. Two places where there might end up being worse value would be when booking with Etihad and through Emirates, just because the flight prices are so astronomical. You're paying over 200,000 points one way, which I think is absolutely crazy, and I don't really think it's worth it considering you can get all the way across for just 90,000 points. You can find a partner award fare through United. That's not to say I definitely wouldn't book these things. If you have a bunch of points lying around, as we said, it probably is a good way to use them. Just because the experience you get on Emirates or Etihad is definitely a touch above or maybe significantly above what you'd be getting on United, Air Canada, or a couple of other airlines. But still, it's not really something I'd really shell out for all the time. Booking with the other partners, as we mentioned, is probably the best value, and there's a ton of them available. I'm going to break it down to the Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, just to keep things flowing just a bit better. In Europe, you have the Lufthansa Group airlines, Lufthansa themselves, Swiss, as well as Austrian. They often have a ton of award space from Toronto and Montreal over to Europe. Even if you're based in Calgary or Edmonton or another different city, you can still easily connect these and not really pay much more. You also don't need to end your journey at Zurich, Geneva, Frankfurt, or Munich, as you can easily connect it onto other cities in Europe using the route networks these airlines have for really no additional cost or potentially just a few more dollars of taxes and fees. Now, both these carriers are rolling out new business classes at this time, with Lufthansa having Allegris and Swiss launching Swiss Senses, but their old products are still really good ways to cross over the Atlantic without much fuss. From Montreal to Zurich, you're going to pay 60,000 points, as well as from Montreal to Frankfurt and Munich, but you're going to pay 70,000 points doing this from Toronto as you just get knocked over to the next distance band. Another fun option is TAP Air Portugal. They don't launch a ton of business class award seats, but they have a decent number of economy award seats available pretty much all the time to Lisbon. And if you are craving some pasta de nata, it is a really good way to cross because you're just paying 35,000 points for Toronto or Montreal in economy class or just 60,000 points in business class. Jumping over to Asia, United still is probably the best way to actually book this because they have the most seats available all the time and you're paying pretty solid rates for them across the board. That being said, there's a couple of other options you may want to consider. Unfortunately, only one of these flies directly with Canada, but it's still easier to really connect your journey through the States if of course you're willing to transit to the US right now. EVA Air is a great option. They don't release a bunch of business class seats, but they have a ton of availability from Toronto as well as Vancouver over to Taipei. This costs you just 50,000 points one way, which is really stellar value, or just 87,500 points if you do end up finding a business class fare. Something on my bucket list is flying to Japan on ANA, one of the country's national carriers, and that's great news for me because they just started releasing a lot more award seats to Air Canada. Most of these do end up being in economy, but there are a few routes available in business class if you are really looking for it. Vancouver to Tokyo is just 35,000 points one way or 70,000 points round trip, which is really solid value. You're getting over 2 cents per point in economy class, which is pretty unheard of because the flight prices for these routes are pretty ridiculous right now. I think you're paying over $1,500 round trip, and that's absolutely staggering. And if you can just spend 70,000 points instead, save $1,500 of cold hard cash, that is most certainly the way to go. As we mentioned earlier, business class space is a little bit harder to pin down, but if you're flying over from Honolulu over to Tokyo, there is an option above the A380s and you can pretty consistently find business class availability here. If you have a ton of flexibility, you can probably find their business class. It's 87,500 points one way from North America over to Japan or from Japan back to North America. I think the best place to find it would probably be through Chicago. So you play a few extra points, maybe 90 or 95,000 from places like Toronto, but it's just 5,700 points per hour of flying, which is incredible value. If you see this, most certainly book it right away. Asiana also doesn't operate any routes to Canada, but that being said, they're a really good way to cross, especially in economy, and the fact that they usually have some business class seats available. There's ample availability in economy. As I said, it's going to cost 50,000 points when you connect it to a Canadian city with just a few taxes and fees, which isn't as good of value as you'd be getting with ANA, but still is pretty stellar. LAX and San Francisco definitely give you the best chance to find business class space for just 75,000 points one way, which is really good value. It's a pretty solid product from there as well. and it's something I certainly want to experience myself. I'm also not sure how long this space is going to stay available for, as Korean Air has bought Asiana, and I think they're going to merge them in later this year. So if you really do want to fly this, right now is certainly the time. There's also a couple of other partners you can redeem your points with if you want to be a little bit more creative. Boutique carriers like Oman Air and Gulf Air operate routes to Europe, but none yet to North America. So if you do want to fly them, you're going to have to fly from, let's say, Toronto over to Zurich on Swiss, and then from Swiss to Muscat on Oman Air. This, as well as Gulf, are great airlines. Again, something I definitely want to be flying myself, but just haven't had the opportunity just yet. Lastly, there's also Singapore Airlines, which is probably the best or most well-regarded airline in the entire Star Alliance group. They aren't offering much business class award space. The only place you can really find it is from Frankfurt over to JFK, which is a fifth freedom route they operate for starting out in Singapore. You can really only find space on the Frankfurt JFK leg for 60,000 points one way. But again, this is really solid value. It's one of the best products I've flown so far. I would fly this over and over again, as it's really the only way you can fly Singapore Airlines right now from North America to pretty much anywhere else. And it's a really cool way to do so. We realized that we talked a lot about what to do with points, but we didn't really touch on how to earn them. So let's spend a couple of minutes going over that as well. There's two ways to earn Aeroplan points. The first way is, of course, flying. You're going to be like, why are you even talking about this? But yes, you can earn Aeroplan points by flying on Air Canada or the other Star Alliance partners by putting in your Aeroplan number when you're booking a flight. The number of points you earn are going to differ based on your fare class. So if you booked economy basic, you won't be getting that many points. But if you booked flex, you'll be getting some more points, but you do pay a much higher cash fee straight up. So I'm not sure that's worth it either, but you'll get a few of these points over your travels with Air Canada. While this is where frequent flyers probably earn the bulk of their points, there's a much better way for the average individual to collect a ton of Aeroplan points and start redeeming for a bunch of free travel. This is by spending money on Aeroplan co-branded cards, or cards that allow you to earn points that you can then redeem for flights on Aeroplan. Some solid options you may want to consider here would be the Amex Aeroplan Core card, which is $120, or if you have a higher tier banking package with CIBC or TD, they have the Aeroplan Visa Infinite cards that cost $139 a pop. But you do get the annual fee waived here, so it's going to be a free card for you every single year. Now, not only do you earn Aeroplan points for your everyday spend, like your groceries, your gas, your dining, you also get a bunch of other perks that you might want to consider when you're flying Air Canada. One perk that's more useful than ever is the free checked bag for yourself and 8 other travel companions when you're booked on the same reservation. With Air Canada now charging for your carry-on, you'll basically be able to save $30 every single time you fly if you just check your bag instead and call it a day. Sorry for the very jarring transition to me from the future, but I recorded the last bit a couple of weeks ago, but I messed up the audio somehow, so I'm just re-recording it once again so you guys get the full picture. If you do want a bit more flexibility with how you want to use your points and you're not super married to Aeroplan points themselves, there's a couple of other cards you might want to consider. We'd suggest looking at cards with transferable points currencies like the American Express membership reward cards. Our favorite, the Amex Cobalt, comes up quite a lot here. It has some of the strongest earn rates in Canada and comes at a pretty reasonable $155 annual fee. It does lack a little bit in the way of perks, as it's not really a full-fledged travel card. It's a bit more of a lifestyle card, but if you're okay to making some of those compromises, it's definitely a fantastic card you want to pick up. Something that has a bit more balance could perhaps be like the Amex Gold. It has stronger travel perks like Plaza Premium Lounge access, as well as some better travel insurance. There's also a much higher welcome bonus on this card, which we're actually going to talk about in the next video coming out next week. If you are that trailblazer in your friend group who's the first to get all of these cards, you can also use the refer a friend link we have in the description below. It does help out the CreditVerse channel quite a lot. So that's all for today's video. We do hope we gave you a bit more information on how really to use your Aeroplan points and maximize some of their value, and a couple of the pitfalls you can certainly avoid. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys want more like this in the future, be sure to hit subscribe. And with that, we'll see you next week. Take care.